Alright, guys. I have been very optimistic about this weapon for about a month. I still very much like this weapon. I'm still very glad it's in the game. But I think today I want to talk about my criticisms of the weapon. Because for the most part, I've been really light on them. And for the most part, I felt like they haven't been that bad. However, I think that this weapon has one very large, very overarching problem. A weakness that is much more noticeable on this kit than the vanilla kit. I'm going to talk about what that means afterward. But for now, I want to talk about the problem. And I think it's kind of funny. Because in a way, I think that this kit was given a tool to deal with this problem that instead enhances it. So the problem I'm talking about is Dread is slow. Dread is a slow weapon compared to the other supports in the game. And this isn't really new information by any way, right? Most supports are going to be like shooters or dualies. They're going to be pretty fast. And other options like flings are generally seen as slow, right? Dread is a slow-moving weapon. But Dread is also a slow killing weapon. Even if you hit a 90, it doesn't kill. It takes a while before you can shoot twice. This might not seem like that long, but trust me, it's quite long in the grand scheme of things, right? In this game that's all about bursting people down quickly, this is not Dread's strength. Dread's strength is consistently dealing damage that other people can use to instantly kill off. But if Dread is fighting by itself, it's not very good at killing quickly. It's also not very good at moving around quickly. So Dread struggles to really influence things. It has to swim, get into an area, do its long swing, and then swim somewhere else, right? That's what Dread does here, yeah? So the problem for this Dread is this Dread does not have an answer to that problem. Instead, it just gives you really strong, overwhelming distance tools that kind of just goes, okay, yeah, that's a problem, but you also now get to have a crab. So, like, you know, you have to deal with the problem, but you have a crab. So, you might be thinking, but we gave Dread a curling bomb. Isn't curling bomb supposed to help the weapon, like, move around faster? And yeah, sometimes you can move faster by throwing the curling. But when I talk about Dread's, like, mobility problems, I'm not really talking about just its ability to go from point A to point B. Because, like, this isn't that slow. You know, it's not great. This is faster. Sometimes that will save you. But that's not that big a deal. What I mean by the speed of the weapon is the speed it takes before it affects an area. So I like to show this off with charger weapons, right? This is an important concept I talk about a lot when I coach, like, pencils. Like, say you're a pencil, and I rotate, like, over here to my sprinkler, right? The time before my weapon becomes effective is this time plus this time, right? That's the amount of time it takes before my weapon starts doing things. For Dread, it's that plus the time it takes to, like, hit twice, you know, if you need to kill. Like, if I have to swim and then kill someone, it's that amount. It depends on, like, the effect you're trying to go for. But at the very minimum, like, this is a 16 frame slosh time before it comes out. So I have to swim, and then there's 16 frames. What V-Dread does is, say you want to pressure an area over here, like where this bomb is, right? And I can't reach that with Dread. So if I want to affect that with Dread, I have to swim into the area, and then I have to sit here with Dread and shoot. And I'm kind of, like, stationary, I'm not very mobile, I'm susceptible to being ran down. It's kind of annoying. With V-Dread, I just go and I throw my bomb and I move away. Or I can just peek a corner and throw a bomb. I can, like, kind of just move around and throw the bomb immediately, and there's not really an extra delay. This is, like, my quick pressure tool to spots my main weapon can't reach, which makes it very fast, right? Even if the bomb detonation is slow. Now, if I want to do that with this Dread, it does this. And if I don't want to do that with Dread, I have to do this. And, like, if I'm going to take the time to charge this stupid thing up, I would rather just do this. Because, like, the charged curling doesn't pressure much further than the main does. It does have some lethal damage. It's not, like, absolutely useless, but it's the same thing. I swim into an area and then I have to sit here and I have to wait a bit. The positive about this one is that it's cancelable. Like, if I swim and then, oh shit, I'm being shot at, I can swim away. But then I don't, like, do anything to the area. Like, I'm giving up the bomb, too. It's not like I'm throwing the bomb and leaving. Because otherwise, like, you know, takes a little bit longer. Basically, curling takes too long to use as a bomb. To use curling as a bomb, it's too slow, it takes too long. It doesn't have the instant value that other bombs do. Specials are a little more obvious, right? If you're fighting against a good V-Dread, and they have a slider, and you're, like, not somewhere around cover, you have to respect the weapon, because all of a sudden they tag you once, and then boom, the instant slider Deathmobile comes out, and you get blown up. Right? With this Dread, there's not really that threat. Even if you're getting 90'd, right? Like, the best threat that this Dread has, in terms of its, like, kill confirms, is that it will 90 pop crab and shoot you here. But this is much, like, more interruptible than the time it takes for slider to become invulnerable. It's much harder to hit this combo than to just hit slider 70. Now, again, none of this is to say that this weapon is bad by any means. But it's to say that in a meta where running people down and fast kill times are more prominent than they've ever been before, this weapon doesn't have a way to rotate around the map quickly. It doesn't have a way to kill quickly. It doesn't have a way to pressure quickly. Everything this weapon wants to do is slow. The trade-off is that it's, of course, pretty good at it. It deals damage pretty consistently. It paints pretty consistently. It gets a lot of its special weapon. Its special weapon is very powerful. But in exchange, you have a slow special. You have a slow bomb when it comes to impact. And you have a slow main weapon. Everything you want to do takes a while. And the weapon clearly can work. It's done well in like 3 area cups back to back. It clearly can do well in the hands of a good player. But this is a problem that V-Dread doesn't have. I still think this weapon is better than Vanilla Dread. But I think the problem here is that what I think made V-Dread such an interesting option is that it kind of occupied this interesting space between a support and an aggro. Like if we talk about that scale I said earlier, this weapon's definitely mostly supportive, but especially when it has Reef Slider or it wants to fight you, it still is like rather capable of having a lot of different ways to threaten to kill you or do really high amounts of damage, to the point where it can actually go in and fight sometimes. This Dread never really wants to turn that kind of aggression up. This isn't to say that it'll never go in and fight, but if it does, it isn't really as threatening at it. It's a lot harder to get value out of, and so it doesn't happen as often, even if it can still do it occasionally. Which means this weapon ends up being a more similar support to more defensive supported weapons, more pain-heavy support weapons. Well, this one's kind of occupying the same space as something like Dooley's or Splattershot Pro, where it wants to fight you sometimes. This one kind of doesn't. That's why I think it pairs best with options like Rapid, that kind of want to be more aggressive, that will take the pressure off this thing and allow it to hang back a little bit more. But even then, when you're hanging back, if you don't have this really high crab output, it's really hard to pressure people at a distance or pressure consistently without high risks. So what kind of builds does it lead to? Builds like this, right? Like, pretend I have 2 sub-Zinc Saver main, like all that, right? Like, 3 main charge-up crab spam builds are what you end up seeing on it. That's what the best Dread Ringer uses right now. They run around 3 mains of charge-up, and they don't bother with LDE, they don't bother with any, like, major forms of swim speed, they only bother with 2 sub-Ink Saver mains so you can paint well enough. So it's like, okay, I might as well play around this crab output that I have. And, you know, I think that's kind of boring a little bit, you know? I think it's a little less interesting than playing around the more aggressive style. The thing that makes up for that is that this is way more fun and interactive and, like, it has more to do than Slider does. This is a way more interesting special, but it takes away from a lot of the depth that I think the main weapon had previously. It still obviously has cool attributes to it, but those attributes don't lead to the playstyle this weapon has. And again, if it's not obvious, while there's some fault with the crab for this, I think the vast majority of the fault lies with the curling bomb. The sub-weapon is generally the tool that gives Dread an excuse to be more aggressive, and that's why I think this should have gotten some fighting-focused bomb. Because I think, to contrast the more supportive nature of the crab, having a sub that encouraged it to, you know, fight more and got more value out of combat specifically, would have traded off that possibility really well. But instead, all we have is this movement tool that you'll practically never want to actually use for movement, because it's not worth the ink cost. And that kind of sucks, you know? So, you know, that's my thoughts. At the end of the day, I still think this Dread is really cool. I still have a lot of fun with it. I still like playing it. I don't want to get across the idea that I don't enjoy using this weapon, or that I don't like that it's in the game, because I do still, at the end of the day, have more fun with this than I do with this. I still like the comps that you can play with this more than the comps with this. I still think that this one is overall stronger than this one. But V-Dread is still kind of special, admittedly. It does still answer problems that the other Dread doesn't, and maybe that's intentional. Maybe that was the point. Maybe the devs saw this and they wanted to make sure that this Dread didn't completely overshadow the other one, and I can totally understand that. I think it's cool that Dread players have to, focus on playing both weapons to some degree. I just wish they were able to do it in a way where this one was a little bit more interesting. Because at the end of the day, while I do find this one more fun and more enjoyable, I do think this one is more interesting. At least when it's not zones cheesing all the time. So, going forward, I'd like to see curling changes that make it a bit more interesting to use. Mainly, I would love if this could be sped up. This was an idea I've had for years. I would like charging curling bomb to be faster. If I could swim and get a decent bomb faster, then I wouldn't mind the delay as much. It would be a more interesting dynamic. In the same way that they buffed Fizzy to make the trail more of an option, I'd like them to do this inverse with curling. Make that more of an option. And in exchange, if you have to tone something back, then go 210 on the crab tank. I don't care. Right? But if curling is more worth using as a combat sub, I think people will run less crab spam anyway. As for this thing, take away its ability to cheese the zone, please. I think people would find this much more of a cool weapon if it didn't cheese zone. And I think it would be much more interesting to design builds around if it wasn't dictated by special power. That's my hopes for the weapons going forward. And that's my thoughts on it, and that's why I think I've overrated Dread a bit. I do still think both are very good weapons. I think they're much closer to each other. And again, I do still think this one is better. It has its advantages. I know I've repeated myself a lot, but I don't want this to come across as I'm never playing this weapon again, its flaws are horrible. It's just, I think it could be more interesting than it is now, and I think the flaws of this weapon are important to understand because the highest level of play, from my testing in the past month or so, the weaknesses of this weapon do really show sometimes. And if you're gonna play it, you gotta be aware that that is really what you're working around and what you're building your comp around dealing with. We'll see what happens in the future for this weapon. Thanks for watching.